And last but not the least, may I invite the presidential candidate of the United Progressive Party, UPP, Chief Chekwas Okorie. As Chief Chekwas Okorie, representing United Progressive Party, is making his way to the podium, I'd like to remind us all that the All Progressive Congress, APC, the COA Party, People's Democratic Party, United Democratic Party, and United Progressive Party are the presidential candidates scheduled for this session. We have 5 in our midst, and we want to thank them for coming. I'd like to call for the national anthem.
This is the second and last session of the presidential debate, organized by the Nigerian Elections Debate Group, NEDG. You are welcome.
May I, at this point, request all candidates to come forward from behind their podium and stand over here and exchange pleasantries, handshakes, and possible embrace themselves in the spirit of friendship, love, and the spirit of togetherness in Nigeria. Thank you very much. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Africa Hall of the International Conference Center, Abuja, venue of Nigeria's 2015 presidential debates organized by the Nigeria Elections Debate Group. Let us quickly acquaint you with details and rules of the debate, but before we do that, let me introduce myself to both the presidential candidates and the audience in the hall today. My name is Eugenia Abu, and today I'm moderating this session. To my left is our distinguished panelist,
Martins Oloja.
And to my right, another distinguished panelist,
Professor Umaru Pate.
We have relied strictly on the approved lists of candidates by the Independent National Electoral Commission. Questions are limited to the broad areas already disclosed to the candidates. There shall be 3 minutes response by the other candidates. The moderator is allowed follow-up questions. Profane language is strictly not allowed. Direct attacks on candidates' personality are prohibited. The time period allowed for questions to be answered must be strictly adhered to, and candidates are allowed 3 minutes each for their closing statements. There is a cross-section of the public which forms our audience. They are not allowed to interrupt, applaud, cheer, yell, or say anything while the debate is on. All telephone sets must be switched off or put on silent. At this point, I'd like to invite Aremo Taiwo Alimi for brief rules on NEDG methodology. Aremo Taiwo Alimi, please.
Thank you very much. We welcome you all to the final round of the Presidential Debate 2015 by the Nigerian Elections Debates Group. The only rule that we have, which is very important, is that no presidential candidate is allowed to endorse another candidate on any DG debate platform. We once again welcome you and now proceed on to hand over the envelopes containing the questions that the moderator and panelists will be asking, which they will be seeing for the first time.
Thank you very much, Aremo Taiwo Alimi. I'd like to use this opportunity to introduce our timekeeper, Mr. Cyril Aidebama. And also we have a sign language interpreter. She's sitting to the right. You can see her there making sure that everybody gets the opportunity to understand what's going on here today. I'd like to immediately start this debate today with the presidential candidate of COA Party. I'd like you to please tell Nigerians why they should vote for you.
Thank you. This is my opening speech. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And just in case there are some international people here, I suggest a gesture for them. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. I want to thank God for this opportunity and also thank the organizers of this event. In my book, Daybreak Nigeria, This Nation Must Rise, I made a gesture symbolically to the young people of Nigeria, and that was to apologize to them. Because given the resources that have been available to us in this country, this is not the kind of nation that they should be inheriting. I therefore felt it was important to do that. Today I would also like to make another symbolic gesture, and that is to say thank you. Thank you to all the Nigerians who have worked hard, who have done their best to resist the evil in the land, the corruption that had been threatening us over the years. People who have been relentless in their work, who have done it faithfully. I want to say thank you, because it is our collective resilience that has kept this nation from tottering into that precipice that people had been expecting us to fall into for quite some time. Thank you very much for that. Today, I'd like to say that a COA Party government would present what I have termed a triple E model for our nation's renewal. And that is E as in empowerment. The empowerment of our people, because they are our greatest resource. The empowerment of our institutions, the judiciary, the legislature, INEC, other bodies, and the empowerment of our economy. This triple E model will seek to restore Nigeria to where it used to be, because we did start well. Our former heroes who fought for our independence set us on the right track, but somehow we lost our way. We need to go back. Recently, I watched a documentary where I saw again the passion, the erudition of somebody like Chief Enahoro, where he was standing before the colonial powers and making the case for the nation. I believe it is important for us to retrace our steps. That's why I am here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. May I just remind political party presidential candidates in this session that there will be a chime from the timekeeper when your time is up, the 3 minutes allocated to you, so it does not startle you. It will make quite a noise to let you know that your time is drawing, it has come to a close pretty much. I'd like at this point to invite Chief Martin Onovo, presidential candidate, National Conscience Party, to tell Nigerians why they should vote for him.
From our perspective, the problem with Nigeria is the leadership. consistent with the position.
Your microphone, sir.
From our perspective, the problem with Nigeria is the leadership. Consistent with the position of Professor Achebe in his book, The Trouble with Nigeria, consistent with his justification at the Garden City Literary Festival in Port Harcourt. It is interesting to know that all ethical intellectuals in Nigeria, no exception, agree that leadership is the bane of development in Nigeria. Such people like Professor Ben Wabweze, such people like Professor Shoyinka, such people like the Honorable Justice Mohammed Owais, if we must move forward as a people and reverse this retrogression, we must get the right leadership. And the right leadership will not come from the moon. It will come from one of us. And it is very important that in a democracy, the people understand the criticality of their votes. Because if they choose the wrong leadership, they must accept responsibility for that wrong leadership. Today in Nigeria, we are dealing with insecurity. We are dealing with corruption that we have been dealing with for centuries. We are dealing with poverty. We are dealing with low life expectancy. We are dealing with this unacceptable level of unemployment, intolerable. And there is absolutely no justification for us to be where we are. Chief Ganifa Ahimmi, the lead founder of our party, had published that the richer Nigeria gets, the worse for its people. If you plot the graphics of poverty in Nigeria and national revenue, you're going to see clearly that the higher the national revenue, the higher the level of poverty. That is very clear. Even the National Bureau of Statistics, which is a government agency, if you use their data, you will find out that Chief Ganifa Ahimmi has been right all the while. Very clearly, we must get the right leadership here and now, this 2015. If we don't, things will continue the way they have been. And all of us promise the same things. Nobody promises anything different. Nobody promises, I will continue corruption. I will loot the entire treasury. Nobody promises that. Everybody promises to fight corruption. Everybody promises to provide employment. What is the difference? The integrity of the party and the integrity of the candidate. That is what makes the difference. That is what the voter needs to look out for. If we get the right leadership today, our retrogression can immediately be reversed. The indices are very clear. 2013 WHO life expectancy, 49 years for men. We are dying and we are leaving widows and orphans. We cannot continue like this. That is our conclusion.
Thank you very much indeed. It's now the turn of the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. Why should Nigerians vote for you?
Thank you, and let me use this unique opportunity to thank Nigerians for their total commitment in the electoral process. In the first place, I believe Nigerians will vote for me, and I want them to vote for me because of the progress we have made over these past 4 years as a government. And we believe that in the next 4 years, we will consolidate in these areas, from the social sector to the economic issues and purely infrastructural issues. Even the things that are sometimes not very, very tangible, we have progressed significantly, and we need to sustain it. Even starting from the electoral process, before 2011, Nigerians were not too interested whether they have voters' cards or not. It is this government that made sure that that consciousness is brought, and Nigerians must decide who governs them. In the social sector, if you look at what we are doing in terms of empowering youth, empowering women, we need to sustain it. If you take issues like health, before this time, guinea worm was a problem. Now we have eradicated that in some parts of this country. Polio was a problem. We are almost eradicating polio. A number of people don't even know. Of course, just like the case of Ebola, everybody knew because of Ebola. In the tertiary level of health challenges, this is the very first time within these past 4 years that our universities and hospitals are attempting open heart surgery and kidney transplant, and we need to sustain it. If you take the road infrastructure, it's key. 30 years ago, the railway system collapsed completely. And you cannot talk about mass transit without the rail system. And we've started. We have completed almost 90% of the narrow gauge that we inherited from the colonial masters. And we are beginning to work on the standard gauge. And we believe that every state capital must be linked up with the standard rail line. That's the only time you can begin to talk about mass transit. If you go to agriculture, you see what we have done so far. Farmers get fertilizers directly, and they are improving significantly. The power sector is sensitive. For us, for micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises to thrive, power must be stable. And the only tonic is the privatization that we have done. We are midwifing that process from 100% control of power by government to 100% control by the private sector. And it take about the next 18 months or so to manage that transition. And when that is done, just like we have taken GSM almost for granted, we also take the power for granted. So it's a very, very sensitive period. And because we have done quite well in these areas, that is why we believe that if we must not move backward as a nation, if we must move forward as a nation, then you allow us to continue. You can go on and count a number of issues. If you take the educational sector, for example, we realize that in the North, the number of dropouts at the basic level was so high. That's why we introduced the Almajiri schools. We made sure that...
Thank you very much, Presidential Candidate of the People's Democratic Party. We must go now to Mr. Okoye, who is the United Democratic Party Presidential Candidate. Begging your pardon, Chief Okoye.
Thank you very much, and I thank the audience, the Nedg, for this wonderful opportunity. Fellow Nigerians, we are on the threshold of history. And I commend us for creating this opportunity for us to interact as Nigerians. Don't look at me as somebody that wants to be your overlord. See me as one Nigerian who seems to know what the problems are and who has the courage to proffer some solutions. Nigeria has been ruled for more than 50 years based on a manual, an incomplete manual for colonization. And for 50 years we've tried it. It cannot produce development because it's not fashioned to produce development. But we are working on it to produce development. Therefore, we must do things that will bring about development. And we know what the issues are. And that's why we, the generations of Nigerians born in the late 50s and the 60s, that grew up in the 70s and went to school in the 80s, are saying, based on our collective hopelessness, that 2015 is not about East, West, North, or South. It's not about Islam. It's not about Christianity. It's not about paganism. It's not about any of the parties. It's not about PDP or APC or the world for attraction between them. It is about the right of Nigerians, their ability to reclaim their sovereignty from a tiny cabal that has held them hostage and divided them along ethnic and tribal lines for more than 50 years, making them weak. That is what 2015 is about. It is about our right. And we have the passion, we have the depth of knowledge. We believe that this country, this beautiful country created by God, should, as a matter of urgency, take the quantum leap it desires. We have the solutions because every nation is gauged, is weighed, is qualified based on 3 key statistics: the strength of your laws, the size of your army, or the efficiency, and then the strength of your economy. These are the 3 underpinnings for rating every country in the world. And I believe that we have what it takes to reconstruct this apparatus we inherited from the British to provide the development that will make Nigerians happy, that will bring prosperity to this land, and that will make sure that we're a happy country. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like now to call on the United Progressive Party presidential candidate, Chief Chekwas Okorie. Why should Nigerians vote for you?
Thank you very much. I'm making myself available for the office of President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria because I want things to change. I want us to move away from where we are to where we should be. There is nobody who can say that he's comfortable that the way we are. But I'm sure everybody wants a very great change that will touch lives, change that will make every Nigerian comfortable. Now,
We are not designed structurally, politically structurally, to develop. We are not designed in Nigeria to challenge leaders, to be creative, to be able to explore and exploit the comparative advantages they have from their various zones, if you like, federating units. And my leadership is going to insist on opening up of the economy, on through federalism, on personal example. I mean, it's easy to refer to Lee Kuan Yew or Nelson Mandela or all the other great leaders, but these were people that made great sacrifices. These are people who, by their personal example, they were able to engineer revolution. And so the UPP that I stand on its platform has come up with a revolutionary agenda. And of course, when you look at it, you see that our symbol is the tiger. So we are coming into this leadership with the boldness, the courage, and the charisma, the aura of the tiger. The tiger protects his cubs with his powerful teeth. The tiger tears down those who come to run the economy down. We will ask questions in UPP government. If we have seen acquisitions we think that are not legitimately acquired, we shall query it. In a UPP government, we shall throw stones. They say those who live in glass houses don't throw stones. No, we are living in very solid moral house. And so stones will be thrown, questions will be asked. And if we do not plug the holes from where our common patrimony have been leaking, we may never have enough for development. We may never have enough for welfare of the people. And I say too, that there is so much of personal example by leader to show. I can't be surrounded by corrupt people. I can't be funded by corrupt people. I can't be embraced, and my friends are all well-known people of dubious means, and then I come out and say I can make things change. I am coming from a background of 39 years of human rights activism, and it is that is my strength, and that is my pedigree. That is my antecedents. That's where I'm coming from, and that is the yardstick with which my government will be judged.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll now go to the questions that have been presented to us, which were collectively brought forward by Nigerians, and I'd ask Mr. Martins Oloja to start.
With the National Conscience Party presidential candidate, Mr. Martin Onovo, we'll see that wherever two or more are gathered in the name of Nigeria's future, corruption is a discussion point. Even the last speaker mentioned corruption and the effects of corruption. What is more, even the yearly rating of Transparency International that has been rating Nigeria as a very corrupt nation, and it's becoming very embarrassing. What will be your template for tackling this menace?
We have previously published our template, and I'm happy you asked this question, because if we do not deal with corruption, and corruption continues to erode developmental funds, especially for election purposes, the data is very clear, then we will not have funds to fund developmental projects. If you remember the 360 billion for roads in 2003, election matter. You remember the $16 billion for power, 2007, election matter. You remember the oil subsidy, 2011, election matter. Look at the colossal sums, staggering sums. Oil subsidy was over 2 trillion. Imagine what 2 trillion can do. Our strategy is called the 4 E's. It is a comprehensive strategy. The first E is education. Education in terms of orientation and anti-corruption advocacy. Addressing the value system. That's the first E. The second E is leadership example, which is most critical, because once the president pockets anything, everybody sees, because this thing is not in the president's bedroom. Some paperwork has to move. Other people start to pocket, and that is why everybody is pocketing in Nigeria, and everybody is pocketing desperately. We cannot develop that way. So leadership example is very critical. The third E is empowerment, because we have seen that when you pay a slave wage that is not sufficient to transport people to and fro work in a whole month. The iron law of survival, according to Professor Ise Sage, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, will compel them to find ways to supplement. Now, we're not saying that justifies crime. We're saying some people have supplemented legitimately by having a small poultry farm behind, by having a small fish pond behind, and things like that. Some people have supplemented legitimately. But you need to remove that pressure by empowering people with a good education, with good employment, with excellent welfare. The fourth one is the one everybody looks at, enforcement. If you base on enforcement alone, you will have, depending on whose estimate you're using, over 70% of Nigerians in jail, and you don't have the prison space. So the first thing is to understand that this thing is systemic, to understand this thing, according to the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, is endemic, and to deal with it with a comprehensive strategy like the one the National Conscience Party, NCP, has presented. Elections in Nigeria are funded clearly with slush funds. The amount of money put in the 2015 elections can transform Nigeria from a third world country to a second world country. Very clearly, we have the data. We cannot continue like this as a people.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like now to ask the PDP presidential candidate to respond to how his party and his candidacy will handle corruption if he wins the presidential election.
Thank you. The issues of corruption, just like everybody said, is topical, is now a major political issue. And I always say that corruption, just like my colleague said, sometimes they look at the aspect of enforcement alone, and people think that that alone will lead to a complete eradication of corruption. And I used to give armed robbery as an example. Immediately after the war, when small arms and light weapons entered the hands of non-state actors, armed robbery came into this country. We have been killing armed robbers. Armed robbery continues. That is enforcement. Enforcement alone doesn't work. So the preventive aspect is more potent than the enforcement. So there are key things. The prevention, then strengthening the institutions, the legal processes, then of course, reorienting our people. Because it's just 3 minutes, let me just summarize. The case of prevention is making sure that nobody even have the opportunity to steal what belongs to the public. And we've done that in the agricultural sector, where before this time it was a major scandal every year. We have prevented people from stealing money through fertilizer procurement or other farm inputs. In the payroll system, where accountants in the offices normally dump a lot of money for salaries and so on, we use the IPS method, use the electronic method to cut it off. You can no longer steal money that does not belong to you. The revenue agents are now keying up into a platform that we have. So you can no longer divert money. No more use of raw cash. These are preventive methods, and we're strengthening this, and it will cut across all sectors, including the so-called oil sector that people make reference to. In that case, you stop people from even getting that money. Then the next, you must strengthen the institutions. It's not the case of individual, no matter how strong a president is. If the institutions are weak, you cannot, or immediately you leave, because Nigeria, you must leave after 4 years or 8 years. Then the country will recede back. So the institutions must be strengthened, and that's what we are doing. Then the legal process is also worrisome. The courts themselves, that is unfortunately not in the hands of the president, not in the hands of the executive. How the courts respond to corruption cases, how quickly they disperse results. Then the next, of course, the issues of changing the thinking of the average Nigerian, thinking that you can just make big money out of nothing, thinking that overnight somebody can start driving a car of thousands. If we change that, and we no longer honor such people, somebody don't just wake up from a village and start building a big house, and you give him a chieftaincy title, then of course we are encouraging corruption. So immediately society starts shifting away from people who cannot defend their source of income. Then the mindset of people will begin to change, and people will begin to condemn ill-gotten wealth, and people will begin to live a more decent life, work harder, and participate in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. UDP, corruption, the handling of it.
Thank you very much. It does appear we have put corruption and to a level where most Nigerians see it as something that is huge, humongous. But like we said, some people react to it, some people react to the symptoms, but very few people know the reasons why corruption is described the way it's described. My colleague has said, oh, it's endemic, it is deep-rooted, it's all that. Why? Because the structure is the problem. And that has created what we call the attitude. Yes, we're going to look for palliatives, but when you base the way a country is run on Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, what kind of system do you want to create? Of course, the junior brother will take the next seat, nepotism, tribalism, favoritism. And there is no way that system will run. And of course, their big brother is corruption. Therefore, that's why in UDP we talk about calm, competence, ability, merit, until you base the running of this system on people that are competent, on people that are able, on people that are merited. You can't expand the space. And if you don't expand the space, you create desperation. And once there's desperation, corruption is the other thing that will follow. Therefore, we must start from the starting point. The system we inherited is defective. We must rectify that system, or innovate it, or reorder it. Otherwise, we will just be repeating ourselves all the time. I'll give you an example. A former military administrator in Nigeria was being tried for corruption. What did he say? I mean, a lecturer in University of Lagos, when we were reading law, was giving us evidence. In evidence, he was telling us about excuses to criminal liability. He talked about accident, talked about madness, talked about self-defense. And he said, Coca is my cousin as a defense. And everybody in the class was like, which one is this? And the man said, somebody was on trial. And he said, you prosecuted permanent secretaries that were corrupt. You seized properties of people that were corrupt. You demoted some PAMSECs. You even jailed some. But you did not try Coca. Before anybody could realize it, he said, how can I try Coca? Coca is my cousin. So, how can a system be based on tribal, brotherly, or religious sentiment? Therefore, build a system based on what makes somebody that is competent, whether it's in Borno State, whether it's in Ogun State, or whether it's in a Delta State. For as long as you take apparatus of state to be an engine for granting favors to friends.
Thank you very much indeed, UDP. Let's now go to UPP, corruption issues.
Thank you. In UPP, we are very, very passionate about the issue of corruption. And we decided that if this cankerworm must be fought frontally, it must start from the top. And it is only when you start from the top that those you are leading can take a cue from your behavior, your conduct. And we believe that some of our laws are weak and allow for corrupt conduct. Some don't even exist that will discourage it or punish corruption adequately. And so we decided that in a UPP government, declaration of assets is not only going to be compulsory, it will be public. And it will be from any person in the position of director to president of Nigeria, not just those in elective offices. And we believe too that that will be reviewed every year for as long as you are still in that office, so that Nigerians will follow in monitoring the growth of your asset to ensure that it's in consonance with your expected benefits arising from your new office. We also believe that what is called the security vote is a major source of abuse and corruption. And we said security votes must be tied to only security matters and must be accounted for. Because we know state governments in this country who use pliable state assemblies to appropriate for themselves security votes that are even more than their state recurrent expenditures. And they proceed to withdraw that and use as they like because it's not accounted for. We've also said that immunity, which has enabled people who enjoy it to behave with a certain level of impunity instead of circumspection, that immunity will be limited to civil matters. All criminal matters must be subjected to criminal prosecution. We have also said, and I mentioned it in my opening remark, that certain acquisitions will be queried. And of course, we have relationship with international bodies that will help us track our funds. I mean, recently we've been having a repatriation of certain funds, but that's not enough. There are so much outside there, and they are in the names of either surrogates, and we'll track these things down. So there will be no hiding place for corrupt people. And once you plug all the holes that encourage corruption at the highest level, I can assure you the Nigerian people, the Nigerian followers who are fantastic followers, will follow you. And however, that simply means that we'll have enough to implement all the other developmental projects, but not enough for a few greedy persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. The next question will be taken by Professor. Oh, I apologize. Professor Shanaya, it's your turn to discuss the issues of corruption and how your party is going to handle that. It's a COA party.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that the fact of our underdevelopment is not an act of God. It is because we are corrupt. We pocket, as has been said, monies that are supposed to be used to develop our society. They are diverted for private consumption. I'd like to tackle this issue of corruption on two levels: the monetary level and then the non-monetary kind of corruption, along with the very good ideas that have already been mentioned by my co-debaters. The attraction of public office in terms of the remuneration is just too great. It brings all kinds of charlatans into the arena because, as we all know, we keep getting this data. Nigerian legislators, Nigerian politicians are the highest paid and so on in the world. How can we be an underdeveloped country? Or if we like to be nicer to ourselves, a developing country, and yet be the ones that would earn the fattest salaries? Somebody has also mentioned the issue of the security votes. We must tackle that issue. People should earn normal salaries that are commensurate with the job that they do. I do not see what job anybody is doing in the public sphere that allows that person to take 20 million naira home at the end of the month. That's one. The non-monetary issues of the running of our public system must be merit-based. People must be rewarded for the work that they do. When it comes to the time to select maybe permanent secretaries, how come it is party bigwigs? How come it is the godfathers that determine who gets promoted? The person who has been working all along, whom everybody recognizes, has been doing their work faithfully, is passed over and over and over again. We must stop it.
Thank you very much, COA Party. Let me return to Professor Party, who has the next question.
Well, my next question is for the PDP presidential candidate, Dr. Jonathan Goodluck. Sir, what are the specific plans, programs, and strategies does the PDP have to address or to rehabilitate the victims of the insurgency in the Northeast, to reconstruct the zone, and also to provide foolproof security system for the country against not only future insurgencies, but for things like kidnappings and eventually bringing back the Chibok girls?
Thank you. You loaded the question and only 3 minutes. We'll try. The first issue is I'm quite passionate about the rehabilitation of the victims, because by this time, at least, we've recovered most of our territories in the north. The whole of Adamawa, that 7 local governments were under the terrorists have been taken over. The 2 local governments in Yobe that were under the terrorists were taken over. Out of the 10 local governments of Borno State, 3 remaining, and even that 3, 2 are partial, 1 total. So gradually we are recovering all our territories, and the people have to move back. How do they settle? Of course, government started thinking about that even before our own successes. And we have 4 fronts. First is the normal government interventions through budgetary allocation and through the NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, which we have funds that will help to rehabilitate the people. Secondly, we also want to have the buy-in of the private sector, and that's why we launched the Victim Support Fund, that we've raised quite some money. Most is still in pledges, but some we've received in cash. But that management of that fund was isolated a little away from government. Government is not directly involved. It is the private sector that is managing it, headed by Danjuma and Adiola. These are credible people, so that the money will not be misused, because there is always complaint about government agencies spending money that is meant for the people. Then we also have what we call PINE, Presidential Initiative for the Northeast. It's a combination of government and public sector contributions, and what we call the Safe School Initiative, that also the business sector, government, and international bodies. That is targeted at rehabilitating the schools. So we have a total package, because if we will wait for line budgeting alone, there's no way you'll be able to build up the infrastructure and help rehabilitate the people fast. That's why we're taking this kind of approach from different sectors. And as the people are going back, we will have enough resources to make sure that they are rehabilitated. But the key thing is, how do we prevent us, and how do we provide security for all Nigerians? That is the problem of every government. Some governments are luckier than others. Some nations have less security challenges. But unfortunately for Nigeria, within this period, we have these terror attacks in the north, we have kidnapping in the south. Of course, armed robbery is also on. We continue to build our capacity. In fact, now we have even introduced drones. We never had drones before. And that is one of the reasons why even in the north we are succeeding, because we are no longer limiting our monitoring to use of aircraft, to other aerial surveys alone, but we are also using drones for remote sensing for us to detect what is happening and handle.
Thank you very much, PDP. Let us ask UDP to please respond to the same question Professor Pate asked, which has to do with security breaches, Boko Haram insecurity, return of kidnapped persons, and how to manage all of those.
Thank you very much. And at this point, it is necessary to commend the effort of government in the recent past in the way of trying to at least reclaim our territorial integrity. It is only a person that is a traitor, a secessionist, or a coward that will be very glad to celebrate the insult or the assault to his nation's territorial integrity. We commend the effort of the government. Yes, like the president said, some nations are luckier than others, but fundamentally, like we said, the security architecture of Nigeria is based on a wrong footing. We have said, what we inherited is faulty. We have to fix that. Where is civil service in all this? For goodness sake, a country the size of Nigeria that has less than 300,000 men in the Army, Air Force, and Navy is scandalous. That we have less than 500,000 policemen is crass irresponsibility. We talk about human resources. We talk about unemployment. Why can't these people be employed? For more than 50 years, the country has been run on a faulty belief. Oh, Nigerians are peace-loving people. They don't make trouble. But trouble has come, and we are unprepared. There is no way you solve security matters other than boots on ground. And some of them are not to be discussed in the public. Security somehow is like making money. I have not seen any man that made money and told the whole world, this is exactly what I did to make money. Some of them can be discussed in secret, but be that as it may, we must have boots on ground. And of course, our territories. A situation, we just have an army barracks, army headquarters. What is the headquarters of an army doing inside the town? Why wouldn't they be at our borders? You see, the wrong things have been done for so long. We must correct them. And that's why so many people are confused. We know what these problems are. It's only a matter of opportunity. Those that have been running it don't know what the problem is. They just see the trappings of government. Let's just go and enjoy, just like we're saying. But Peter has made, we're going to correct quite a lot of them. And of course, the people that are displaced, normally there will be palliatives that we made available to them. We're going to provide health matters, health issues to adjust, to take care of their displacement. We're going to look at their school system. We're going to look at education in the Northeast. Nothing moves unless you have education. People are going to be educated, but in their own environment and the way they see it. We're going to make education that is very, very functional and will address the issue of the people. And in terms of security, anyway, I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. UPP, what would you do about security?
Well, the question, the way I understood it, is double-barreled. One is about those who have been the victims of insecurity. And yes, I believe that they need to be rehabilitated, that they need to be given their lives back, and those who have suffered bereavement also need to be have their situation ameliorated. I also believe that there are those who may not be in refugee camp now, but they ran away from their places of business to their places of origin. And those people are going to come back, and they must be put into the calculation amongst those to be rehabilitated. That is with regard to that one. As for the Chibok girls, I'm a little worried that now that we are occupying, our troops are occupying the dreaded Sambisa forest, these girls are not anywhere to be found. And most of the territories occupied by the insurgents are now recovered. Still, the girls are missing. Perhaps we may have to be considering what their leader said, that he will sell them away into slavery or marry them out. Then we'll come back to the issue of security, how to prevent it. UPP government believes very strongly in state policing. We believe in state police, we believe in community policing. And it is in this way that every citizen will see himself or herself as an equal stakeholder in the security of this country. So that even within his own small environment, he sees signs, things that should be suspected. He would then report to the appropriate authorities. But what we have here is a situation where we allow something that should have been nipped in the bud by the police to grow to a large extent that will become a national dilemma, and the entire Nigerian armed forces will be directed to the area. The other aspect is to have very functional, well-trained, well-motivated army, police, and the rest. Now we are making progress in fighting the insurgents. You ask the soldiers, they say, oh, they are now better equipped, they are now better trained, they are now better motivated. Why do we have to wait until we get to this point before we begin to motivate, before we begin to equip, before we begin to do the things that we ought to have done long ago? And this is a country that is endowed with so much resources that we needed by every means to have all of these agencies very, very functional, very, very professional, and well motivated, so that these things can be nipped in the bud. But now, here we are. But the UPP government will begin immediately to equip and decentralize the police, decentralize the security agencies, and get everybody involved in the issue of security. We'll go beyond that. We have said the time in UPP that we must relate this, nobody is an island unto himself.
Thank you very much, UPP. Co-op party, your solutions for insecurity.
Thank you very much. While congratulating our armed forces, and indeed ourselves as Nigerians, on the progress that has been made so far in reclaiming those towns and villages from the insurgents, we must realize that the ultimate success of this whole new onslaught against the insurgents should really be the bringing back home safely of those Chibok girls. That is when our celebration can really be full and meaningful. And we continue to hope and pray that that will actually happen. Meanwhile, Our armed forces must continue to receive the support, the full support in every area, in terms of equipment, in terms of their own welfare. I mean, if people are going to be faced with the possibility of dying while defending their country, then they must be certain that their families will be well taken care of, that they would not have, their children will not have to go into the streets begging for bread. That is important. The matter of trust comes to my mind also in this respect, because things happen around us. We see them. However, if people do not trust that when they give information, that information is not going to backfire. You know, people have to be sure that the information that provide, the intelligence that they help to gather, to contribute to, will keep them safe. And this is where the integrity of that whole system comes into play. What I would like to also suggest for the whole of the northeastern part of our country that has been so terribly devastated is that we have to set in place maybe something like the Marshall Plan that was set up at the end of the Second World War to rebuild Germany. We must prepare as of now, and that is why all the money that is available, we can't afford anymore for any amount of money to be wasted or diverted. We will need it in the Northeast and to develop all the infrastructure in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. May I now invite NCP to discuss the issues, as it were, on security.
Well, I will want to emphasize that security challenges are not limited to the Northeast. Just a few weeks back, we know about the robbery in Lekki Phase 1 in Lagos. It lasted over an hour. At the gate of the estate, there is an armored personnel carrier. It did not respond. By the foot of the bridge, 2 blocks away, there is an RRS station. It's not just about money, money, money. We must have the right values as a people. If the leadership, that's why we go back to leadership. If the leadership is weak and corrupt, the people will be corrupt. If the leadership is patriotic, the people will be patriotic. We have seen this with kidnapping in the Southeast. When Obiano became governor, we saw a difference very clearly. Leadership is critical. A number of people were not replaced with people from Borno. There was kidnapping going on in Anambra. Peter Obi was fighting it very well. But when Obiano came, we saw the radical change in Anambra. So it is the same thing. All these problems we keep analyzing and reanalyzing are very simple and basic. We must deal with the armed robbery issues that are higher, probably in the Southwest, with the other crime issues like militancy that are maybe higher in the South-South, and with this Northeast challenge. And it's a leadership thing. We're talking about equipping our armed forces. Is there any year we didn't have a budget for our armed forces? How many times have we budgeted for Bini Shagamu? All these problems we will keep analyzing, reanalyzing till we deal with the root cause, which is the leadership problem. If you have high unemployment anywhere in the world, you're going to have high crime. The correlation is very simple. With the level of unemployment, with the level of corruption, with the level of impunity, very vexatious impunity, that the political rulers of Nigeria exhibit, it provokes people to follow their line of lawlessness, their line of crime. When people know how much oil per barrel is sold, they know how much production Nigeria makes because they are public numbers. They imagine the revenue. They hear a budget every year and they don't see it. Everybody doesn't have the same moral threshold. It is not an excuse, but these are root causes we need to deal with before we bring in these other issues of motivating our soldiers. And you can't motivate with corruption. Corruption universally demotivates. Equipment, all these things are not about funding because we had them better when we had less funds.
Thank you very much. May I remind participating presidential candidates that the issues that are raised would be best addressed if you let us know what your party will be doing as solutions. That is perhaps why the debate is on. And indeed, that is the real reason for the debate. We'll be very pleased if you deal with the issues and let us know how your party will address the issues. And I'd like to take the oil sector next. The petroleum sector commands a significant place in Nigeria's economy, yet it is bedeviled with all kinds of problems. I'd like to ask UDP, what would be your strategy for making this sector truly effective? For example, refineries should work and gas flaring should end.
Thank you very much. The country has fallen into what has been described globally as the oil curse. We have oil, we export oil, but before oil, there were other products. And of course, in our own system and on our party, and if we, by the grace of God, get in there, definitely the economy will diversify, agriculture will achieve its proper place. Products that used to be produced and exported from different sides of Nigeria are going to be given the needed impetus. By that I mean, we had things we were doing before oil came. Oil wasn't the first thing. And now that we have oil, yes, it is scandalous. It is annoying. It's a shame that we keep importing fuel. Must we build a humongous refinery that will take all the money in our economy to build or to maintain? We can build small-scale refineries. You can group states, maybe 5 states, 6 states, build a refinery of a capacity of 30,000 liters. Maybe. That may be a solution. Where they produce PMS, you have the quantity of AGO they can produce and DPK. But in a situation where we bring in humongous apparatus that will require a whole lot of money to service, it's not fair to the people, it's not fair to the economy. And we keep taking these things out to refine. We create jobs for other people. And countries that in fact import crude oil from Nigeria, some have about 120 products from it. But in Nigeria, we only have 6. Why can't we at least have about 50 products from an item we produce in this country? We should be able to have refineries that work. The science is not rocket science. After all, during the war, my uncle was one of the engineers that championed the refining of crude in the Biafran era. That technology has been shut down. But why can't we revive them? They worked then. Why can't they work now? Because we live in self-denial. We don't call a spade a spade. We don't call competent people to do things. We base things on favoritism. We base things on relationships. If we have engineers, how come the engineers cannot be empowered by government or challenged by government and say, produce this by the end of 2 years? We want template for refineries. 10,000 liters here, 20,000 liters here, 40,000 liters here, and we'll stop importing fuel. When Kennedy said we'll put a man in the moon at the end of the decade, there was no equipment in America that would do it. But having made that challenge, Americans were challenged. So unfortunately, he was not there. But by the end of the decade, somebody was in the moon. Therefore, leadership should be able to challenge the intellectuals, the elites, to come forward with more solutions.
Thank you very much. May I request at this time that we please put our phones off or on silent. It is time now to invite UPP to talk about the strategy his party has for making this sector truly effective.
Well, it is really scandalous that up till this time, the National Assembly we have has found it difficult, for whatever reasons, to pass the Petroleum Industry Bill, because I believe that that would have gone a very long way in addressing some of the problems we have in the petroleum sector. However, a UPP government will pursue that very vigorously, and whatever it takes to get the National Assembly of our time to see the need to pass that bill, they will be passed, and my government will not hesitate a minute to sign it into law. Having said that, the petroleum industry has to be opened up. It has to be opened up to investors, and the right incentives must be there. Government should hands off the issue of refineries, the issue of having to determine who imports petroleum products and all that. Flaring gas up to this time of our development is also another embarrassment, because there are so many uses to which the gas we are flaring can be put, and the Nigerian economy will be the better for it. Even the energy sector that we are yet to address here, we have enough gas fuel to be able to power their machines and give us electricity. So I am saying that the UPP government will look into privatization of the petroleum sector in a manner that will be attractive to investors, both local and foreign investors. And of course, there will be incentive in repatriation of profits, because if you have invested your money, you need to have your profit and perhaps repatriate it to invest elsewhere. These are some of the areas we will be interested in. And we have seen a cartel in the petroleum sector. And that is, that cartel must be removed completely, because that is why we cannot, over years, even audit the ministry effectively that oversees the petroleum sector, and all manner of suspicion about money missing and not missing being bandied about, and this is not auguring well for us, and is not helping the sector to grow. So there is also need to look into the issue of cartel. Of course, the theft of crude oil, of course, that one is an indictment on our security agencies. We have a very functional naval force and then air force, yet foreign vessels come in and cut away our oil very freely and very easily. So these are things that somebody has to pay for it. Somebody has to be punished for it. But that is not happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Core Party, talk to us about the strategy for making the petroleum sector truly effective.
Thank you. This is where the challenge really lies also, apart from security for Nigeria at this time. The falling price of oil is staring us in the face, and it's like, what are we going to do to continue to run our government? The benchmark, the current benchmark, I believe is like $53, but even last week, Monday, the price of oil on the international market fell to below that $53. We are in a bit of a trouble. The government, a COA government, would really seek to allow for more private participation. Maybe the government should reduce some of its own ownership so that we can raise funds thereafter to pursue the infrastructural development that we need to pursue. There should be tax incentives to people who will invest in that sector, so that they will be sure to make returns on their investment. The liquefied natural gas issue has been a sort of a success story, and that we need to pursue and strengthen for our purposes. But on the issues of oil bunkering, on the issue of the thefts and so on that are going on, how we need to pursue that under a COA government would be that our traditional, our statutory law enforcement agencies will be the ones to monitor and ensure that all those activities are brought to an end. we are not so sure of the effect of using, former, how would one qualify them, groups that were fighting for one thing or the other, using them to secure our pipelines and so on. That may not be working as effectively as one would like to. So let us restore that job to our traditional law enforcement agents. It is part of their duty. Let them do it, and I believe that will help that sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chief Martin Onovo of the NCP.
Very clearly, we will have to deal with the challenges in the upstream which are less. Upstream is crude production. These are challenges of regulatory efficiency mostly. So they are administrative and bureaucratic challenges that will reduce cost of projects if they are properly addressed. In the downstream sector, we will not privatize. That needs to be clear. We will not. We will make sure that the refineries which have been owned by us for decades and have run successfully in the past will run successfully again. This is because we consider that a critical sector for national development and for the development of the economy. Today, in today's terms, we waste too much funds, quite over 700 billion on subsidies alone. That goes away from the budget on subsidies alone. Now, this is because we are paradoxically importing, in quote, what we produce. Because this crude oil we produce, refineries, we have to refine them. 4 refineries. If we have maintenance issues, we fix them. They are simple to fix. They are fixed in Ghana, they are fixed in the US, they are fixed all over the world. There is no challenge. That is my expertise. I'm a registered engineer. I've practiced in Europe, I've practiced in America, I've practiced here in Nigeria. It is very simple. If they are so obsolete they cannot be maintained, we demolish them and rebuild them. It's that simple. Our strategy to deal with the downstream sector is number 1, restore existing domestic capacity. That's number 1. Number 2, upgrade existing refineries. Interestingly, how many Nigerians know that the 445,000 barrels per day capacity you have is sufficient to provide about 40 million liters of PMS? And national consumption is only 35. So even without building any new refineries, if we run the 4 refineries at 100%, we won't import a drop. So clearly, importation should not be in the picture. It is very wasteful. Today's price, domestic production, we will produce and we will reduce the price of fuel because what we're doing is wasteful. That's why it's so expensive. When we do the right thing efficiently, we will sell fuel in this country when we restore domestic production for 48 naira per liter in today's market numbers. That is easy. That is not a feat. In Venezuela, it's 12 cents per gallon. That comes to less than 7 naira per liter in Venezuela. And Venezuela is our fellow OPEC member. Nigeria is the only OPEC member that has accepted importation of petroleum products as a norm. It doesn't make sense. Why are we doing what does not make sense? The Senate report on privatization has concluded that privatization has failed in Nigeria. Why will anybody suggest privatization? What has happened to all the privatized entities? We will not privatize. We will fix it. We can fix it.
Thank you very much, NCP. Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, People's Democratic Party.
Thank you. In the petroleum sector, what bothers Nigerians and what government must really strengthen and properly looked at in the next 4 years is the issue bordering on the proper management. Of course, just like my colleague talks about the upstream sector, proper management, which of course the PIB will deal with, just that the PIB is still pending in the National Assembly because we have to strengthen the regulatory and make it more transparent, more open. So with or without the PIB, we must make that sector more transparent, and we have to unbundle the PIB would have helped us to unbundle the NNPC, which is too big, and sometimes issues of inefficiency crawls in. The other issue on the upstream is the issues of community that led to the Niger Delta restiveness, which government will also continue to deal with, because already what we are doing is working and we have to strengthen it. One thing again that is associated with the upstream that, of course, he did not mention, the issue of stealing, what you call bunkering, though I prefer to call stealing of common assets, which we are developing technology now. I don't want to go too far on that, but we are on it. Contracts have been awarded, and we must stop it. The issue of the gas, how to gather the gas, then transport the gas, and maybe gas to power, gas to industry, which has to do with the midstream. These are areas where we must involve the private sector. Well, the issue of downstream is combination of government and the private sector. Downstream has to do with refining, has to do with production of fertilizers, has to do with petrochemicals. The privatized companies of government, at least the Elime Petrochemical, is working very well. Unfortunately, it was bought by an Indian. It's not a Nigerian, but that is a very big success story, where the Elime Petrochemical was abandoned, but now it's one of the biggest in the world. And of course, they are expanding it. Recently, they are planning to invest 1.5 billion to even expand and bring fertilizer production into it. So it's not as if all the privatized government entities have failed. But for the downstream, what we intend to do is even to liberalize that sector in terms of refining. We want a situation where we, instead of importing petroleum products, we should export. And if we will go into exporting petroleum products, then of course you will involve the private sector. Our commitment is to make sure that it's open up for private sector investment. We are moving away from government management of the economy directly to the government creating the enabling environment, while the real economic processes are handled by the private sector. We can no longer run efficient systems if Mr. Government will do everything. So we're encouraging the private sector to drive the process.
Thank you very much, presidential candidate for the PDP. Martin has the next question.
And the next question goes to UPP presidential candidate. And it's on one other aspect of our problems, education. It's a worrisome reality that the state of our education is embarrassing. And of course, you see that our own, in the olden days, our education institutions were founded on discipline and integrity, but today, not so. To the extent that our premier university, that used to be number 4 in the entire Commonwealth, is now like number 30 in Africa. This is worrisome. We see products of our educational institutions are not fit even for the industry. There's a huge gap between the training institution, our schools, and the industry they are to serve. Now, what are your immediate and long-term plans to restore dignity to our education?
Well, quite frankly, education ought not to be a federal government responsibility. The federal government of UPP will embark essentially on broad policies that will guide the establishment of educational institutions and then, of course, the quality of what is produced. But because of our peculiar circumstances, I do not fault the fact that the federal government has gotten itself involved, even in primary school education, to the level of building emergency schools or building nomadic schools for itinerant cattle rearers. Of course, there should also be schools at the marketplaces so that those who haven't the opportunity can close market and stop by for an hour or two to also acquire education. Our situation requires such emergency measure, but if we look at it closely, educational institutions should be left in the hands of those who manage it, who know how to run it, who set standards, who go by their standards. By the time we began to admit people into universities by quota system, by educationally disadvantaged in such a way that somebody who has scored very highly is now denied admission in favor of somebody who scored very poorly on account of where he comes from, in order to make that area to catch up with the others. That was when the educational standard began to drop. And so we have to go back to situations where institutions were competitive. We are even employers of labor. We are going to institutions that had high standard of graduates, of skilled manpower to recruit their staff. And in that situation, our educational standard will begin to return to what it used to be. It is we will encourage privatization in the area of education, but with a broad policy to guide its practice. Those who are teaching in educational institutions must be trained to really teach. There are people who are admitted to lecture when they are not equipped to impart knowledge. And you don't expect a wonderful output when even the person who is teaching does not acquire the necessary knowledge to give a good account of impart knowledge. Of course, the issue of remuneration is very important, and that has to be looked into. But there is too much government involvement in educational institutions. So they will have to open it up to those who can manage it and make it competitive, and then, of course, our education will grow. Where the area you talked about, our education, was not being controlled by government.
Thank you very much. UPP would like to invite COA Party to make her submission.
Thank you very much. COA Party had identified ignorance as one of the evils bedeviling our society. And that ignorance is not only in terms of formal education, but education in a broad sense. Even the citizens do not know their rights and responsibilities. Therefore, COA Party would seek to address these two dimensions, the formal education as well as the informal education, the education of the society. With respect to our schools, right from primary school through to the tertiary educational institutions, there must be a total reorientation. Because the reality is that education here has not led to the transformation of our society. Education is supposed to breed people who will look at society and say, no, things cannot be this way. There is another way of doing things. And therefore, they will begin to use the education that they have received to transform the society, to find solutions to the problems that are confronting the society. But what we have is we churn out people from our educational institutions, and where are the products that they are putting on the market based on the education that they have received from our institutions. This is a real blight on us, and therefore there must be a review of our curriculum to orient it towards development, towards problem solving. And as for the general education that the society needs, we must know how to behave in public, how to take care of things that belong to everybody. There is just so much that it seems we need to relearn. We used to have civics in school in those days. There must be a reintroduction into our school system of what it is to be a citizen of a country. What do you expect from your government, and what do you owe your government? These are the directions in which COA would work.
Very much indeed. It's time to invite NCP to make his submission.
Very simply, the challenges we have seen in the educational sector after our national assessment by NCP are basic challenges. In some cases, it is as simple as the roof is not there, and the students have moved to under a tree, which is not convenient for learning. In other cases, is that you don't have enough teachers. In other cases, it's that the teachers claim that, yes, we are here, but we don't have the tools. These are basic things that do not require over-analysis. If you don't have what you need, government needs to provide in government schools. Now, the federal government, led by the NCP, National Conscience Party, will focus on federal schools. Already, there are private universities, there are private primary schools, there are private secondary schools. All will be overseen by government to ensure that they meet the federal standards. But for the schools owned by the federal government, I have the advantage of having my first degree from the University of Ibadan and having a second degree from a Tier 1 American university, University of Houston, in Texas, USA. Based on that, I have seen both systems. There is no radical difference other than basic things we're supposed to do as a people we leave undone because of corruption. Because sometimes you see that funding has been made. How many times since 1999, have we made funding for science equipment? Billions. How many times? So funding has been made, but the equipment is not in place. The roads have been funded, but they're not in place. Basic things. It is not the same thing in every school. In some schools, you have one physics teacher covering 3 levels. He's covering SS2, SS1, SS2, SS3. One teacher. He's over-labored. And you can't get the best out of him. There are world-class standards. What we are going to simply do is take each federal educational institution, do a gap analysis. World-class standards versus where we are. We come up with a gap closure plan. Very simple. There is no esoteric challenge in our educational system. If you have a situation where the teacher failed the exam of the class, which I think happened in Edo, it's corruption. How did he get recruited? Was there not a recruitment process? So back to corruption, back to leadership, back to bad governance. The challenges in the educational sector are basic. They are not exactly the same in every school. In each federal school, in some universities, there is no water supply. How do you run sewage system without water supply? How much does it cost to build an industrial borehole that a federal government of Nigeria cannot build? Where 20 billion can disappear in dollars, cannot build a borehole? So these are basic things of leadership.
Thank you very much, NCP, the presidential candidate of PDP.
Thank you. When you raise the issues of education, most of the times people get confused and think that it's only the federal government that handles everything about education. Education is in the concurrent list, the local governments, the states, and the federal government. Basically, the local governments and the states handle primary education and, of course, including tertiary education if they desire. The federal government responsibility is more on tertiary, which is also not exclusive. But within this period, of course, you talked about University of Ibadan rating, and I quite agree with you that all of us feel bad that no Nigerian universities has reached where they're supposed to. Recently, African Union, it's not recently, it's annual, African Union have been giving awards to scientists who have done very well, innovators and so on. And from Nigeria, it's quite low. The reason is the quality of teaching and learning at the tertiary level, if I are limited to the tertiary level. But within this period, we've done quite well. If you go and do survey, we have equipped most of our universities, most of our polytechnics and the College of Education, including state-owned, using the TED fund, the Tertiary Education Fund. We have, this country have never managed the Tertiary Education Fund the way we have, and you can attest to that. This is the infrastructure that failed over the years, and you cannot change overnight, a period of 4 years, and you think you will change everything. But if we continue the way we are going, and that's why Nigerians should give us the opportunity. In the next 4 years, most of our universities will have equipment that and facilities that will enable them to do real research and compete with other scientists all over the world. I mentioned in my opening remarks even issues of tertiary health, what we call health tourism, where Nigerians go to other countries for major operations, like open heart surgery, like kidney transplant. In fact, University of Benin started even work on stem cells, but because of the global cry that human rights activists, maybe like some of my colleagues here, and that issue of stem cells challenges the human spirit and so on. So they dropped that. So you really see that we are going back to our old days when our tertiary institutions were on top. But through the through the universal basic education, we support the states at the basic and secondary level. It's not that we're taking over that segment. We can never take over. But we help to build schools. It's only the Amazigh schools that also participate in the funding, but mainly to build and give it to the states to run. Just like my colleague mentioned that there are some states where you don't even have buildings or you don't have furniture. And we feel that using the funds of the universal basic education, which is actually owned by the states, the local governments, and the federal government, we can also use a part of our own to support the states, and that is what we are doing to improve the quality, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Very much indeed. I would like the UDP to make his submissions on education.
Well, it does appear that everything we're talking about is all interlinked to the system we have. And it's also sad commentary on us that Europeans spend money, borrowed money, to set up education in this country. And so many people went to school free. But it's sad that Nigerians can't even go to school, go to good schools without paying with an arm and a leg. Those that benefited from this system have made it a business enterprise. Education is not supposed to be so. I went to a public school, and of course when we were in school, private schools were not in vogue. And in my years in the University of Lagos, we saw academic excellence. As a matter of fact, my father, who was in the Federal House of Representatives in 1979, believed so much in the educational system of Nigeria, so much so that I had admission to study in Yale. I had admission to study in Princeton University. I had admission to study in Stanford, and then Johns Hopkins University. But he said, no, you must school in Nigeria, and I will not help you with the JAMBs. That you have to pass JAMB, or you go and become an artisan. But what do we have these days? The educational system is bankrupt. How will a policeman or a soldier send his child to school? We're not even thinking about that. There must be a system whereby education, even at the public level, is very standard. We saw it before. Once upon a time, people had 3-course meal in the university cafeterias. But go to university cafeterias these days, they're in comatose situation. That's sad, and that's not good. Therefore, what do we need to do? We must re-engineer education right from the nursery school level. Nursery, primary school, secondary school. Federal government has to intervene. But by federal government intervening under our direction does not mean it excludes private people to participate. But we have to set the standard. And the standard will be such high level that you must have to meet up with it. And of course, teachers training colleges, we're going to take that very seriously. Look around the country. I can't see any school that is a teachers training college. When we were in school, we used to have teachers that come on teaching practice. They are no longer there. Colleges of education may be there, but College of Education and teachers training colleges are like oranges and apple. They are both round, but they are not the same. You must have teachers training colleges where teachers are taught how to be teachers. And unless we have that, the dropout in school, the bad performance in schools will keep happening. Therefore, you intervene at that level. In every state of the federation, the federal government should be able to have teachers training colleges. And we encourage the states to also do the same in the local governments, where they also intervene. And then, of course, at the federal level, by then characters are formed. Federal government will have to intervene in the universities. Private people can also.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to invite Professor Patti with the last question.
Kowa Party, 50 years after Nigeria's independence, we are still importing rice, importing wheat, importing sugar. Our textiles have almost died because of lack of cotton. What specific plans do you have, assuming you have won the presidency, to address the issue of agriculture in such a way that it will be useful to our industries and also bring money into the pockets of our people?
Thank you very much. Kowa Party will pursue sufficiency in grain production because this is important. We must have enough grain produced in our country which also serves to feed animals. How come imported chicken, for instance, is cheaper than the chicken that is produced locally? It's because a hectare of land in some countries produce up to 6 times the grain, the corn, the millet that 1 hectare produces in Nigeria. We must continue the work which is being done, and we must congratulate the current administration on that. Great strides are being made in the realm of agriculture. There must therefore be selective mechanization for that to happen, as well as the development of high-yielding grains, rice, sorghum, millet, corn, whatever. We need also to strengthen our cooperatives so that when people band together, they can multiply in almost, in larger terms, their yield. Commodity boards and so on must be empowered to function more effectively. In the area of agriculture as well, we need to go back to developing our export crops. We have, like we have been saying, and that has been coming up, we have abandoned our groundnut pyramids and so on. Thank God they are gradually coming back. And that needs to be strengthened so that we diversify the base of our economy. And agriculture definitely is one of the areas in which our economy can be diversified, and it is also an area that can produce a lot of employment, especially, I would like to add, to women in the rural areas. This is very, very important to women and to our young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to invite NCP to discuss the same issues.
Our simple strategy is to review the National Agriculture Management System. And based on work we have done outside government, we have noticed a few critical things that, if provided, will grow agriculture by quantum leaps. One is adequate supply of fertilizer, very critical. The federal government, led by the NCP, will not farm. We will support farmers to farm. We will support the unemployed to also farm. Access to land is another critical thing that we can encourage state governments, because they are in charge, based on the Land Use Act, to make easier for farmers. We will not be able to make a quantum leap in agri-production if we continue with traditional farming practices, hoe and machete. We must mechanize. How much work can 10 men do? How much work can a tractor do? We must mechanize, and we must support that process of mechanization. So a few critical things that we must look at: access to fertilizers, mechanization, access to credit, very important. Unfortunately, based on the ethical ambience, what we have had in the past is that if you provide funding for agriculture, credit for agriculture, not funding, credit, even people who are not farmers will forge some documentation and take the credit. So corruption is at the root of all the sectors. You cannot discuss education without corruption. You cannot discuss power without corruption. Corruption is at the root. It's a canker, and it is subverting our development. Access to land, access to credit, mechanization, and very importantly, fertilizer supply and availability. In addition to that, in this country, a few decades back, before our democracy in quotes, we had agri-extension services in this country. What happened? Agric Extension Services provide technical support. What happened? So if we do the right things as a people, we will get the right result. There is no esoteric challenge in any sector in Nigeria. What we need is the right leadership to do the right things, basic things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. PDP presidential candidate and agricultural improvement in Nigeria.
Thank you. When you talk about agriculture, it's one sector that people who are honest admit that really our approach to agriculture has really changed. In terms of the import bills, you know that we have dropped by almost to third in terms of rice and other staple food. And I give an example. In 2012, we had a devastating flood, and the whole world expected us to cry out for grains to be brought into this country, and that food prices were going to rise. Food prices were reasonably stable. Even with the drop in oil prices, my colleague mentioned about Venezuela. There were almost riots over staple food in that country because it also depends on oil. But because of the quantity and quality of food we are producing locally, even when the oil price is dropped and the value of the naira dropped a little, it does not affect the food prices. That shows that government policies in agriculture are succeeding. And of course, the FAO recently gave us recognized us as at least reducing this basic hunger by 50% as one of the MDG goals. But the key thing for us is to continue to do what we are doing. In the agricultural sector, we moved away from government control of fertilizer and other inputs to private sector, and we use the electronic wallet. That means that you can no longer steal money, and you can no longer divert fertilizers or other agro inputs belonging to the farmers. One thing again is that the age of the farmers are getting older and older. So how do we encourage young people to go into agriculture? Before this time, young people take agriculture as a job for the old people in the villages because of the way we look at agriculture. That's why we are looking at agriculture as a business, not just as a rural poverty, wealth creation or poverty elevation and so on. We are talking about the total value chain in agriculture and bringing manufacturing, processing, and manufacturing. So we are no longer talking about groundnut pyramids now. The days of groundnut pyramids are over. We have to process the groundnut. We have to add value to the groundnut. We are not going to talk about cotton pyramids because we cannot continue to export raw materials. When you export raw materials, you're exporting labor, and that is the new orientation. In terms of the quantity, we are encouraging dry season farming. That's multiple cropping. Before this time, our own agriculture is based on only rain-fed. It is only during the rainfall that you plant. The farmers calculate during the period of rain and plant, and they get one harvest a year. Now we are talking about multiple cropping, and we introduced dry season farming because of our irrigation program. So we'll continue to add that. Then again, just like my colleagues mentioned too, Prof, the issue of high yielding varieties, and that's the area we are also going in. If you look at our cocoa production and others, most of them are, what we are giving to farmers now, produce 5 times per unit land compared to what they were using before. So.
Thank you very much indeed, PDP presidential candidate. UDP presidential candidate, talk to us about cash crop export, domestic food security, and agricultural improvement.
Thank you very much. Agriculture, everybody knows, is the mainstay of Nigeria, African countries, and third world countries. But that's in the subsistence level. By virtue of the advancement of society, there's definitely need to be changes in how things are done. And that's where you come in with mechanized agriculture, high yield crops, and of course, very fundamentally, our Land Use Act needs to be touched up because the land tenure system is such that those that want to even go into agriculture do not have the legal basis to do so. Therefore, we need to look at the law, interface with government agencies, and of course, there is need for us to have corporations that buy up whatever the farmers produce so that they are sure whatever they produce is bought at the economic value and probably stored and then probably half processed for export. where you subject the farmers to the vagaries of the market situation, it makes it difficult for them to plan and for them to get the real value for what they're doing. Therefore, the government must set up agencies that are, organized and managed by very competent people, not government managing them directly. We have seen some of these things cannot be run effectively by government right from time. And then we're going to look at agricultural bank, not the type of the banks that we have right now, where you have most people that are into importation of car spare parts taking loan from agriculture. It has to be for people that are into agriculture, strictly so-called. And they're going to be monitored. They're going to be managed. They're going to be supervised properly. A situation where loans are given, and instead of deploying them to agriculture, you go and acquire 2-3 more wives. Must be discouraged. These are the drawbacks of farming, or the old system of farming. And then you have high yield crops. When you bring that, it doesn't take so much to produce some of this. Like you mentioned, rice. If we make use of 2 million hectares of land space in every state, and there are about 24 states that are rice bearing in Nigeria, and you deploy that to agriculture, we're going to be exporting a whole lot. Most of the countries that export them just manage about 1 million hectares. And in sugarcane production, it's sad that 95% of our sugar is imported. But if we make use of 500,000 hectares of land space, we're going to be exporting sugar. And then sugarcane, of course, you produce sugarcane for it. Therefore, agriculture is something that is very serious, and it needs to be taken seriously. We talked about fertilizer. Yes, the federal government has done well in that regard, but there is a little problem. The land is so saturated that, in fact, it needs more of lime at the stage where we are now than fertilizer to make it productive, because it reintroduces nitrogen to the soil.
Thank you very much. It's your turn, UPP.
Thank you. Let me admit that some impetus has been given to the agricultural sector, and so there is a visible improvement. But so much is yet to be done. Your UPP government will take steps to expunge from our laws the land use law, so that people who own land can as well use their land as collateral to attract necessary funds to go into agriculture and develop their lands. There is something wrong with our policy yet. We have made fertilizer available. People are improving on the yield of their farms. But at the same time, we have livestock, we have cattle, eat up all of these things, and of course end up having people slaughtered here and there. Argentina is one of the largest suppliers of beef in the world, but livestock and cattle do not struggle for space with human traffic or commuters in that country. So something has to be done about our grazing policy. Then I can tell you that even in the Second Republic, there was a report that agriculture may well provide this country far more revenue than oil. But Nigeria is not structured to benefit from all that from agriculture. The way we are structured is such that the federating units, if you like, call them states, but UPP will prefer to have the geopolitical zones as federating units, are not allowed to develop at their own pace, so that each side will explore and exploit its own comparative advantage to have the competitiveness to be able to produce not only for their own use, but for the country. In the First Republic, regions were contributing to the center. Now, some areas have so much vast arable land that they can feed this country. Some others have some other things, not as much as the land space they have. And therefore, implicit in that is resource control. Our government shall go for resource control, so that those who have whatever God has given them will use it, produce, and contribute to the center. And the economy will grow, employment will be created, and Nigeria will be the better for it. But the way we are structured not to even think. We are structured not to even become ingenious. We are structured to become lazy and wait for the end of the month to go to the center and collect revenue and distribute. So the UPP government will go for true federalism that will open up the economy, including the agricultural sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we have almost come to the end of proceedings for this final presidential debate for 2015. I'd like to ask each presidential candidate to give a 1-minute round-off. We cannot take 3 because of time, and I'd like to start with NCP. 1 minute.
Well, very clearly, everybody here agrees that we haven't done so well in the last 15, 16 years. That is the reason why we need to change direction this year. We're going to need a leadership that has a clear vision. The vision of the NCP is very clear. We will address the fundamental issues that have been raised the way we have said today. In addition to that, we will make sure that we domestically refine and sell petrol at domestic cost recovery levels, which is much lower than what we are subsidizing today. In addition to that, we will increase the minimum wage by reducing the maximum wage, thereby compressing the inequality index. That is very critical for social justice. In addition to that, we will make sure that corruption is completely controlled, because corruption is at the root of misgovernance in Nigeria. Finally, we assure you that we have the plans in place, like you know, we have the integrity.
Thank you very much indeed. PDP presidential candidate.
Thank you. Let me use this unique opportunity to thank Nigerians again for showing so much interest in the electoral process, and to reassure Nigerians that elections will be conducted as scheduled by Nedg. Presidential and National Assembly elections on the 28th of this month, and the governorship and state assembly elections on the 11th of next month. And let me reassure you again that over this 4 years period, the government has started very well in so many fronts. In agriculture, we've started very well. In the road infrastructure, those of you who travel by road, you have noticed that there's significant improvement. We have brought railways back. The power is improving significantly. The health sector is improving. The education sector is improving. And we believe, and we ask you to join us, that with the PDP government for the next 4 years, these areas will even advance further and will not go backward. There will be no way Nigeria should begin to think about moving backward. We must move forward. We must consolidate our gains and move our country forward for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed. UDP presidential candidate.
It's obvious by the current realities that after 50 years of independence and running on a premise that is very, very faulty, that we cannot work out a formula by which we can live in peace as a people, it shows our education is defective. Therefore, it's about time to turn a new page. It's about time to build a system that is based on competence, ability, and merit. And having done that, we will be able to be sure of a system that will give us shape, what we call security, health, agriculture, power, and education. Not exactly in that order, but by the time we come in and declare state of emergency in these 5 key areas, the multiplier effect on society will be so much, and that Nigeria will be said to be on its path to quantum leap. I thank all of you for listening, and on 28, be sure to go and cast your vote. Conduct yourself in a peaceful manner. I thank you, and may God bless Nigeria.
Thank you very much, UDP. UPP presidential candidate.
Thank you, Nigerians. I wish to rely on the assurance of Mr. President that come March 28th, there will be presidential election, and I therefore call on Nigerians that that date is a date of destiny. That is the date you decide where to go, whether it's business as usual or to embrace the UPP revolutionary agenda. I do not want anybody to refer to me as the best president you didn't have. I want to be referred to as the best president that Nigeria has had. And so come in that day, vote for UPP and the revolutionary agenda of the party with the tiger head. We begin to lead the way. I love all Nigerians.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to invite COA Party to make her final comments.
Thank you. The French have an expression, I'm a French person, and it says, "Ça balance terrible." What it means is that things are getting dangerous. We are in a position where we cannot afford to go down anymore. We must arrest this slide backwards. It is important. And the President Boni Yayi of Benin Republic, He said, the secret of development is work. We simply have to get to work using our minds and using our hands. We must set to work in this country. If Africa is going to stand tall among all the nations of the world, then Nigeria has to get its act together. It is time to work. Nigerians, let's set to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I'd like at this time to invite you all to step forward from behind your podium and show love, peace, and unity in, giving each other handshakes and embracing each other if need be. Please come forward. Thank you. While this is going on, I would like to invite the Chairman, Board of Trustees, Nedg, Mr. Shola Omole, and the Group Managing Director of AIT, Mr. Tony Akiotu, to come forward for presentation of certificates of participation.
Edge, please. Edge.
Gentlemen and lady, would like to start by inviting the presidential candidate of COA Party to step forward to receive her certificate of participation, Professor Comfort Oluremi Shonaya. It's time to invite the National Conscience Party presidential candidate, Chief Martin Onovo.
DG.
The photographers want some attention. I'd like to invite the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, to step forward for his certificate of participation. I'd like at this point to invite the presidential candidate of the United Democratic Party, Chief Godson Mbodile Okoye, to receive his certificate of participation. And finally, the presidential candidate of the United Progressive Party, UPP, Chief Chekwas Okorie. You would agree that it has been an evening well spent, and I would like at this point to thank the presidential candidates who have participated in this final round of presidential debates, and to say the 2015 presidential debate is brought to you by the Nigerian Elections Debate Group, NEDG, with the support from INEC, BON, NUJ, NGE, NDI. BON member stations are official broadcasters. Africa Independent Television, AIT, and the Nigerian Television Authority are the official production stations for global distribution of the 2015 debate signals. Africa's largest radio network, Radio Nigeria, and Voice of Nigeria, our official radio production stations. I would like at this point to ask the audience to now participate by clapping for everyone who has done so excellently well. Have all done excellently well. And to our viewers across the globe, many thanks for watching. To our radio audience, thanks immensely for listening and for staying with us. On behalf of Professor Pate, to my right, our distinguished panelists, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, and thank you.
And on behalf of panelist Martin Onloja, on my left, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
My name is Eugenia Abu. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Nobody is allowed